Hey everybody, Ryan here at eTrailer. Today on our 2020 Toyota Tacoma, we're going to be showing you how to install the Firestone Ride-Rite air helper springs for the rear axle. But before we get into that, I want to check them out and make sure they're going to work for you. This is what your airbag is going to look like installed underneath your truck, and it's pretty straightforward. So essentially these are just going to replace the factory jounce bumper. So originally you had a small rubber, almost look like a mound attached here, and all that does is prevent your suspension from bottoming out. Don't really provide any additional support or adjustability, and that's where the airbag is going to come into play. It's going to fill that gap in between your axle and the bottom of your frame and kind of act as a cushion almost, right? And so you're going to be able to adjust these from 5 to 100 psi. Most people find themselves, you know, somewhere in the middle of that, and that's really going to help out, you know, when you're towing stuff or got things in the bed of your truck or anything along those lines. You'll be able to fine tune it and adjust that pressure to the ride that you find the best. When it comes to an airbag, even though you can adjust it and fine tune it, there is going to be a little bit of maintenance involved. These are going to require a minimum of 5 psi, so that's something you're going to have to kind of keep an eye on. Because if you ignore that, the bag can potentially get damaged, and you know, that's not good. To help with that, if you want, and just to even help make adjusting them easier, you can always use an air compressor, and usually you can control all the pressures back here right from your cab. So it's really cool, and a lot of times with how I mentioned the maintenance, a lot of times you can set them up in a way that it'll automatically kind of keep these maintained for you, whatever you set it at. So you don't even really need to think about it. If that's not something you're really interested in doing, or you don't need a ton of adjustability, there are other enhancements available. For example, timber ends or sumo spring type enhancement. They essentially, it's almost a big jounce bumper in a sense that it stays in place. You bolt it on there, you're done with, right? You can't adjust them, and you kind of get what you get. But you know, it's definitely not a bad thing because you don't really have to worry about them. So it really just depends on how you plan on using your truck and how you plan on, you know, what are you going to be towing and how often are you going to be towing and everything else like that. Other than that, at the end of the day, if you're looking to get a little bit better ride out of your Toyota and, you know, have that adjustability to make towing a little bit better experience, airbags are definitely a really popular choice, and a lot of people have good luck with them. As far as the install goes, these really aren't too bad. A lot of times airbags can be pretty easy or a real pain. These are definitely on the easier side, so something you should be able to do. You know, take a little time, set aside, stay patient, and you should be able to get these on. But speaking of that, if you'd like to see how that's done, feel free to follow along. We'll go ahead and put them on together now. To begin our installation, we're going to be underneath the back of our truck, and I just temporarily lowered and removed our spare tire, give us some more room to work. It will be able to go back up once we're done. And then you want to essentially jack up your truck's frame, and what we're trying to accomplish is to get the space in between our axle and the bottom of our frame to get bigger. That way we have more room to work. What we need to do is remove our factory jounce bumper, and we're going to try to get it as low as we can. Essentially, as long as we cut it, you know, probably about even with these U-bolts here, we'll be in good shape. I'm going to use a Sawzall to cut this off. It's pretty thick rubber, so something like this will probably be your best bet. But with that said, be careful. You know, you don't want to cut in any lines or anything. And just make sure we get that out of the way. And the reason for doing that is so our airbag can clear. So I got the jounce bumper completely cut off, and this is what it looks like. And like I said, as long as you're about flush with the top of those U-bolts, you'll be in pretty good shape. At this point, we can move over to the workbench and start to assemble our airbag. So we're going to have the lower plate. All right, and we'll set that down. And this portion here that kind of jots out, that's going to face towards the inside of our vehicle. And the bottom of the airbag, there's going to be a threaded hole. That hole is going to line up with this hole. Okay, so we'll flip that on over. And then you're going to have this bolt. We're going to get that started, and we're just going to do it by hand for now. That way we can still kind of pivot this around. Once that's in there, that flip back. And what I've noticed, the actual air fitting here, this portion that we're going to put a fitting in, that'll end up on the side of the bracket too, facing towards the inside of our frame. So I roughly have that positioned. We can then grab our upper bracket. All right, so the holes in it are going to line up like that. It's going to rest on the dowel pin there. So pretty straightforward. Once that is on there, we can then take this nylon lock nut, and that's going to thread onto it, and going to grab a, I think, 15/16 size socket, and tighten and torque this down. Once that is torqued, we can then take our air fitting here. That'll just thread into the top of that. We'll get this started by hand. Take a 1/2-inch wrench and just kind of snug it up a little bit. We don't want to get too carried away because chances are good, once we get this up under the vehicle, we might have to tighten this more or something like that to get it positioned where we need it to go. But just to be on the safe side, get it started by hand, give it a little extra crank. That'll engage the thread locker or the thread sealer there, and we know at the very least it shouldn't leak. So now that we have this kind of set up, what I think will make things easier if we take this bracket here. So the way it's going to work, eventually it's going to set like that and kind of push up to the inside of our frame rail. But these bolts are kind of tricky to get to under there. So what I might do, if we can, is almost just get a couple of them started. Probably these outside ones, and we can put that in there and then swing this up into place to get the other two going. But it's just going to be this type of bolt. And a flange nut. I'll just get them started by hand. Like I said, I'm just going to do these two for now, and that should work. Make it a little bit easier. At this point, we can take our assembly that we made and set it in place. Actually seem to work out pretty good. Now we can just start to kind of loosely assemble everything. So on our lower plate, there's going to be a couple square holes in it on each side. You can take these longer carriage bolts and drop them through. Like that. And we'll have these little straps here. I found on these it kind of works better in our situation with these bigger shocks here. I'm not sure if every vehicle has those, but to take the elongated hole and face it towards the inside, do that, get a flange nut started, hand tight. And I'm going to use the same combination and the same little strap here on the other side. what I've done is lowered our jack stand a little bit. That way the distance in between our leaf springs and our bottom of our frame is essentially at ride height, normal ride height. You know, I got it supported just a little bit. But what that did was line up our brackets and everything. So that using that same hardware combination that we used here, I'm going to put those 2 remaining bolts in. And again, just get them started by hand. Now if you look on the outside of your frame rail, about in the middle of the top of your tire, if that makes sense. So where our upper bracket was, that's going to line up with the hole in the frame rail. And what you're going to do is take the big bolt and a flat washer and push that through both the frame and the upper bracket. So here's where that bolt comes through. What you're going to do is put on a flat washer, split lock washer, and this nut. Get all that kind of slid into place. And we'll just get it started hand tight for now. Moving back to the area on the outside of her frame, right by where we put that big bolt through. There's going to be part of the upper bracket that comes up, and there's going to be 2 holes in it, and it's sitting against the small bracket. You can take this piece that comes with the kit, set that like that, and we're going to put some bolts through it, and when we tighten them down, it's going to clamp to that factory bracket. These are the bolts you're going to use. If I can manage to get them lined up here. Let's try the other one. I can see that one a little bit better. It might make it easier to line the other side up. So I got that bracket in place and those 2 bolts hand tight, and this is how it turned out. Now you want to take an 1.1" socket and wrench and snug up the big bolt. Make sure that the bracket is centered, and we'll snug it up. Now we're going to snug up these bolts that are holding the bracket on top of our airbag to the bracket on the frame. Just going to use a 9/16 socket and wrench to get those all snug. So I got all these tightened down, and then while I was up here, I tightened down these ones on the side as well, like we talked about. Use a 1/2" socket and wrench for those. And now we can tighten down these guys, and whenever you tighten these up, you want to run them down evenly. That way it kind of pulls everything together the way it should. So this is a 9/16. Kind of just alternate between the 2 until it's snug. And then don't forget to come back to this bolt down here that we left loose earlier and snug this down. I'm going to use a 9/16 to do that. And now we need to come back with a torque wrench and tighten all the hardware down to the manufacturer's specifications. Once you have the driver's side done, you're going to repeat the same process over here on the passenger side. And essentially, it's identical with one exception. They have a heat shield that they give you that kind of sandwiches in between the top of the airbag and the upper bracket there. And just make sure you put that on the airbag whenever you're assembling it. That way it'll be in place. But aside from that, they're all the same. And now what we're left to do is figure out where we want to mount up our airline fittings, our inflation valves. That way we can start to get our airlines routed back to the bags. Here at the back of the truck, where our trailer hitch is, I decided to use the nice little bracket that they give you. It just zip ties to the hitch. There's other ways you can mount them up. You know, you can check the instructions to find a different solution you might like. But with that in mind, the inflation valves, just thread, you know, you just bolt them onto the bracket, pretty straightforward. And then I cut our air tubing in half. All right, and the tubing is going to plug into the fitting. So really what you got to watch out for is make sure this has a good clean cut on it. So you don't want to use a regular pair of snips because it'll kind of kink it and potentially leak. So use something like this, or even a utility knife, and put this on a block of wood or something, get a good straight cut. There's also tubing cutters, but we'll make sure we get it how we like. So that's a good clean straight cut, no burrs or anything on it. That's going to plug right in to the fitting. You'll kind of feel it snap into place. What I'll do now is get the lines routed, and then I'll show you the path that I took to get there. We got our lines routed, and when you're doing this, do your best to avoid any hot or moving parts or any sharp edges or anything. I run it up along this factory harness here and use some zip ties along the way to secure it. It just continues forward and then kind of loops around and goes into the fitting in our airbag. The same way, plugging it at the back, good clean cut, and it pops right in. That fitting, like we talked about almost at the very beginning, I did turn it about another 1/8 of an inch or so just to kind of give me a better shot to get that hose plugged in. For the passenger side airline, essentially the same exact setup, you know, just routed it over and ran it along. Really the only difference in the kit, they give you a thermal sleeve. It's just kind of a heat protector. So before you cut the line and plug it into the bag, take the little sleeve and slide it over. And essentially it's identical to the one over on the driver's side. With everything connected, I'm going to put some air in our bags. I usually put about 50 psi in each one. That way we can check for any potential leak. So once you have the air in your bags, to check for leaks, you can listen to hear if you see if you hear anything. And you can also, you know, let it sit for a while and check the pressure, see if they changed. Or to get a better idea almost right away, you can spray down all of the connection points and fittings with soapy water. Let it sit for a minute and see if you see bubbles rapidly forming. If you do, you know you have a leak. You can let the air out of the system, remove the line from the fitting, recut it, and plug it back in and check it again. So I sprayed these down, I sprayed the ones up by our airbags. Everything looks good, so we're in pretty good shape. And that'll finish up our look at and our installation of the Firestone Ride-Rite air helper springs on our 2020 Toyota Tacoma.